Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. It was supposed to be just another Friday. I had stayed late at the office trying to finalize a report for Monday's presentation. Exhausted, I pulled into the driveway of our suburban home, the one Emily and I had bought 8 years ago, when we first learned she was pregnant. I was excited to see my son Josh. He was the light of my life and the glue that had kept me grounded through long days and sleepless nights. I stepped into the house, calling out Emily's name. I expected her usual greeting or Josh's laugh from the living room. Instead, silence greeted me. The house felt too still, as if it had held its breath in anticipation of my arrival. "Emily. Josh?" I called again, setting my briefcase by the door. There was no answer. I headed upstairs. The faint smell of lavender, a scent Emily had recently grown fond of, lingered in the hallway. It was odd and disquieting. My gut clenched, but I brushed it off. They had probably gone to the park or out for ice cream. Still, something felt off as I approached my study to drop off some work files. I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I stepped inside and found my desk in disarray, papers scattered everywhere. I muttered under my breath. Josh loved rummaging through my desk, pretending he was an explorer. I smiled faintly at the thought and began gathering the mess, stacking documents neatly. That's when I saw it. A plain manila folder tucked beneath a pile of old invoices. Curious, I opened it. At first, the contents did not register. A single crisp, official piece of paper was inside, bearing the name of a genetic testing laboratory. The headline hit me like a truck. Paternity test results. My vision blurred as I skimmed the words. My hands trembled. It listed Josh's name at the top and mine as the presumed father. The results were devastatingly clear, 99.9% certainty. I read it repeatedly, my brain refusing to process the words. My knees buckled, and I collapsed into the chair as the world spun. My breathing grew shallow. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. This can't be right." My mind raced. Why would this even exist? Why would Emily or anyone do such a test? The possibility that Josh was not my biological son clawed at my heart, leaving it raw and exposed. He was my son. I had been there for every scraped knee and every bedtime story. But the paper in my hands told a story I was not ready to hear. A cold sweat broke out across my brow as I sat in stunned silence, replaying every moment of the past 8 years in my head. How had I missed this? Was there a time, a look, a moment when Emily had betrayed me? My chest tightened as memories of her laughter, distant smiles, and late nights at the office crashed over me. I set the folder down carefully, as if it were a ticking time bomb. For hours, I sat there, trapped in a loop of disbelief and denial. The house grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon. I couldn't move. The reality was too heavy. Then the sound of Emily's car pulling into the driveway jolted me back. My heart began to race again as she stepped inside with a cheerful greeting. She did not expect the storm she was about to face. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed real, undeniable answers for both myself and for Josh, for the family I thought I knew. As Emily came up the stairs, her heels clicking softly on the wood, I slipped the folder back into its hiding spot. My hand still shook as I forced myself to stand and greeted her with a hollow smile. "Hey, honey," she said, leaning in for a kiss that I couldn't return. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I lied, attributing it to a long day at work while inside. The document's words tore me apart. Morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window as I sat at the table, the manila folder resting in front of me like a loaded weapon. My fists were clenched, my knuckles white. Emily hummed softly as she moved about the kitchen, unaware of the storm about to break. "Coffee?" she asked in a light tone, as if all were well in our little world. I didn't answer, eyes fixed on the folder. Its weight pressed down on me. The words from the test result were etched in my mind, taunting me with brutal clarity. Every moment of doubt, and every sleepless night rushed back with vengeance. Then her voice faltered as she turned and finally noticed the tension. "Jake, what's wrong?" Without a word, I picked up the folder and tossed it onto the table. It slid across and came to rest near her hand. Emily's brow furrowed as she looked at it, confusion flickering across her face. She opened it and scanned the page. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and frozen. "What is this?" she whispered. "You tell me," I said in a low, trembling voice. "Go on, explain it." Her hand shook as she set the paper down. "Jake, this isn't what it looks like," she began, but I barked a bitter laugh in reply. "Not what it looks like? Really? That's the best you can say?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around as if seeking escape. "It's nothing. A mistake, a misunderstanding," she stuttered. I slammed my fist on the table, making her jump. "Don't insult my intelligence, Emily. A misunderstanding. A mistake. This test shows Josh is not my son. How can that happen by mistake?" She opened her mouth, then closed it like a fish gasping for air. "It was a long time ago," she stammered, "before we were married. I didn't even know for sure." I cut her off with a sharp laugh. 12 long years, Emily. 12 years of marriage, of raising a child, of trusting you. And you didn't think I deserved to know. Tears welled in her eyes, fueling my anger further. "Jake, I didn't think it mattered. You're his father. The other man, he's not in the picture. He never was," I shouted, standing so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You think that makes this okay? That you lied to me and to Josh for his entire life?" Her tears spilled as she tried to defend herself. "I was scared, Jake. I didn't know how to tell you. And after Josh was born, it didn't matter anymore. You loved him. You're his dad." I stared at her, incredulous. It mattered every time I looked at him and thought he was part of us. "You took that from me. You decided it didn't matter and left me no choice." She sobbed openly, clutching the table's edge. "Jake, please. I made a mistake, but it doesn't change anything. Josh doesn't even know. He's your son, he's ours." "No," I said, shaking my head. "He's not mine. He's a lie. A lie you've been telling me every day for 12 long years." Emily's face crumpled as her sobs grew desperate. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It was one night. I didn't even know for sure until after he was born. One night," I snapped. "You've been lying for over a decade. Do you even understand?" She reached out, but I stepped back. "Jake, I'm sorry. I was wrong. But you must believe me. I never wanted this to come out. I didn't want to hurt you or Josh. You're his dad in every way that matters." I pointed at the folder, my hand shaking. "This isn't just paper. It's proof that our marriage has been built on a lie. So tell me, Emily, why on earth should I believe anything you say now?" She collapsed into a chair, head in her hands. I felt only the crushing weight of betrayal and the hollow ache of a life I thought I knew crumbling around me. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her with the folder and her excuses. I needed air and space. I had to figure out what to do next. I went to my old apartment, a place I hadn't visited in nearly a decade. Dust clung to the surfaces, and the air was stale, like a tomb for a life I had left behind. It was the only space untouched by Emily, the lies, and the weight of 12 long years. I dropped my keys on the counter and headed for the liquor cabinet. I pulled out a bottle of whiskey, poured a generous glass, and slumped onto the couch. The dim light from the street lamp barely illuminated the room. I stared at the amber liquid swirling in the glass, my mind replaying the morning's confrontation. Her excuses and desperate attempts to call it a misunderstanding fueled my anger. One night had rewritten the course of my life without my knowledge or consent. I drained the glass in one swallow. The burn in my throat was a welcome, fleeting distraction. My hand tightened around the glass as I thought of Josh. His smile, his laugh, The way he always looked up at me with trusting eyes. And all along, he wasn't mine. No, I muttered aloud, shaking my head as if I could rid myself of the thought. He's mine. I raised him, taught him to ride a bike, and tucked him in at night. I'm the one he calls Dad. Yet the cruel truth lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. I recalled worrying about Emily's distance, her late nights, her work trips. Had I been blind, or had I ignored every warning sign, desperate to believe in our life? The rage built inside me, hot and suffocating. I gripped the glass tighter and, in one swift motion, hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards raining down like remnants of my marriage. I stood there, chest heaving, staring at the destruction I had caused. It did not ease the pain of betrayal. The room felt too small and the air too thick. I grabbed the whiskey bottle, poured another glass, but my hand shook too much to drink. Instead, I slammed the bottle onto the counter. Its sharp clink echoed in the silence. This couldn't go on. I had to take control and reclaim my life before it crumbled completely. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a long unused number. The phone rang as I stared at the broken glass on the floor, its jagged edges glinting in the dim light. Everything I thought I knew was shattered. Jake, a gruff voice said. It was Mark, my lawyer and an old friend who helped purchase our house. It's been a while. What's up? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I need to file for divorce, I said, my voice hoarse but firm. There was a pause. Divorce, Mark echoed cautiously. What happened? I closed my eyes and ran a hand through my hair. It's complicated, Mark, but I need this done fast. Another pause followed. All right. We'll meet to discuss details. Assets, custody, everything. Do you want to talk about what's going on, or just the legal matters? I let out a bitter laugh. Just stick to the legal stuff. Trust me, you don't want to hear the rest. All right, he said businesslike. Come by the office tomorrow, and we'll get started. Thanks, I muttered, ending the call. For a moment, I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the mess on the floor. The weight of what I'd done settled over me like a heavy blanket. Divorce, a word that felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone else's story. But it was mine now. I poured the rest of the whiskey down the sink, its sharp smell rising as it gurgled away. I didn't want it anymore. The anger that drove me to this moment simmered beneath the surface, but I knew it wouldn't sustain me. I needed clarity. I needed a plan. Tomorrow, I would start taking my life back. Tonight, I sat in silence in that old apartment, accompanied only by the ghost of a life I once thought was real. The lawyer's office was cold and impersonal. I sat across from Mark, the divorce papers spread on his desk like a battlefield map. He explained the process in clinical terms, but I barely heard him. Words like divorce, custody, and assets swirled around me like phantoms. All you need to do is sign here, Mark said, sliding the pen across the desk. My hand hovered over the paper, the weight of the decision settling over me. There was no doubt left, no reason to second-guess. I signed the papers, each stroke of the pen feeling like I was cutting myself loose from the life I thought I knew. It's done, I said flatly, pushing the papers back. Mark nodded, his expression unreadable. Do you want to discuss custody, or should we hold off for now? I hesitated at the thought of custody. Josh, the boy I'd raised as my own. I shook my head. Not now. Let Emily deal with it. For now, I just needed to go. Mark nodded and tucked the papers into a folder. I'll get this filed and keep you updated. I left the office feeling hollow, like a shadow of the man I once was. My feet carried me back to the car as I drove toward our house, the place where everything had fallen apart. The drive home was a blur, with the radio softly playing in the background as I rehearsed the conversation I dreaded. By the time I pulled into the driveway, anger simmered beneath the surface. I wasn't sure if I was angrier at Emily or at myself. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Emily sat in the living room, tense, her hands gripping the edge of the couch cushion. Josh's school bag lay by the door, a reminder of the life that would never be the same. She looked up, eyes wide and cautious. "Jake," she began softly, almost pleading, "can we talk?" I dropped my keys on the table and glared at her, my jaw tightening. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said. Her face crumpled. And for a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then I remembered the lies, the years of deception, and my chest hardened. I said, "Emily, the divorce papers are filed. It's done." Emily's breath hitched as she covered her mouth. I saw tears well in her eyes, but they no longer moved me. "Jake, please," she whispered, "don't do this. Think about Josh. Think about us." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Us? There hasn't been an us for a long time, Emily, and Josh deserves better than this." She stood, hands trembling. "I made a mistake," she said, voice cracking, "but it doesn't change what we built together. It doesn't change that you're his father in every way that matters." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You don't get to decide what matters, Emily. You made that choice 12 long years ago when you lied to me." Suddenly, Josh's footsteps echoed down the stairs. We both froze as he stood there, eyes wide with confusion, clutching his favorite book. "What's going on?" he asked softly. My heart broke all over again. I stepped toward him, forcing a fragile smile. "Nothing, buddy. Just grown-up stuff." He looked between us, his brow furrowing. "Are you angry?" I swallowed hard and crouched beside him. "No, Josh, I'm not angry. But things are going to be a little different," I explained. "Okay," he said slowly, still unsure yet trusting me as always. I stood and looked at Emily, who watched us with tears streaming down her face. "This is better for everyone," I said firmly. "Josh doesn't need this. He needs stability, and I can't give him that. Not like this." Emily didn't respond. She simply nodded, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her actions. I turned to Josh and ruffled his hair. "Go grab your shoes, buddy. We're going for a drive." He brightened slightly, his confusion giving way to excitement. As he ran upstairs, I took one last look at Emily, knowing words would not change anything. "This is it, Emily. For all our sakes, this is how it has to be," I said quietly but firmly. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out the door, the sound of it closing behind me echoing in my ears. Life after the divorce wasn't living. It was survival. For the first year, I moved through my days like a ghost, going to work and returning to an empty apartment, staring at the walls and wondering where it all went wrong. The silence was unbearable, a vacuum that sucked the warmth from my world. The echoes of laughter and footsteps that once filled our home haunted me in that stillness. I thought of Josh every day, despite my resolve to cut ties. I convinced myself that a complete break was best for him. He deserved a stable life, free of bitterness and anger. Yet not a day passed without wondering if I had made the right choice, or if I had been too afraid to face the truth. I got used to being alone. I had no family to lean on. My parents had passed away years ago, and I was an only child. Friends had drifted away after the divorce. I adapted by working late and finding hobbies to fill a void. But deep down, I knew solitude was a hollow substitute for the connection I'd lost. Years blurred together. I stopped tracking time and asking about Josh or Emily. They became figures in a book I once read, distant, almost fictional characters. Then one evening, 8 years after I left their lives, there was a knock at my door. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I rarely had visitors. I shuffled to the door and opened it to find a young man standing there. He was silhouetted against the setting sun. In his late teens, tall and lanky, his face was both familiar and foreign. "Can I help you?" I asked cautiously. The young man hesitated, then his lips twitched into a nervous smile. He said, Dad, and the word hit me like a punch. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then it clicked. Those unmistakable brown eyes mirrored my own. "Josh," I whispered, barely audible. He nodded, his smile growing wider, though tinged with fear or desperation. "Yeah, it's me." For a moment, I froze. The years collapsed into a single instant, and all I could see was the little boy I left behind. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, and I pulled him into a hug. He stiffened at first, then relaxed, his arms wrapping around me. "Come in," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Please, come in." Josh stepped inside, glancing around the small, sparsely furnished space, but he didn't mind. He sat on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with the frayed hem of his jacket. He looked tired, worn in a way no teenager should. "What are you doing here?" I asked, sitting across from him. "Not that I'm not thrilled to see you, but it's been so long." Josh hesitated, then admitted, "I didn't know where else to go." His eyes dropped to the floor. "Things have been really bad." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What's going on?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom lost her job a few months ago, and we've been struggling with rent and bills." He added, "She won't admit how bad it is, but I hear her crying at night." I sat back as the weight of his words sank in. Despite everything, I had never wished hardship on her, especially not when it affected Josh. "Why didn't you come sooner?" I asked softly. Josh shrugged, his eyes misty. "I didn't think you'd want to see me after everything." His words hit me like another blow, and guilt surged through me. I leaned forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Josh, you're my son. Nothing changes that. I'm sorry if I ever made you think otherwise." He nodded, pressing his lips into a thin line as he fought back tears. "I didn't know if you'd help, but I had to try." "Mom doesn't know I'm here. She'd be very upset if she found out," he whispered. "Of course I'll help," I said firmly. "Whatever you need, I'll do it." Josh looked up, relief flooding his face. "Really?" he asked. "Yes, I'll figure something out," I promised, though unsure how. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose, a reason to fight. Josh had returned to my life, and I wasn't going to let him down. The days that followed were a whirlwind. I moved with purpose, determined to help my son, and the years of solitude and regret faded away. I threw myself into fixing what remained of my broken family. It wasn't about Emily anymore. It was about Josh. It always had been, even when I didn't realize it. A father's promise became my driving force. The first step was to understand the full extent of their struggles. Josh explained the details in a weary voice, as if forced to grow up too soon. Emily had been let go from her marketing job due to budget cuts. At first, she managed with savings, but as months passed without stable work, the bills piled up. She took odd jobs, but it wasn't enough. Josh even skipped meals at school to save money for groceries, a dagger to my chest. I had left thinking it was the right thing to do, but my absence had made their burden heavier. I wasn't about to let that continue. "Josh," I said one evening, "I'm going to help you. You and Mom will figure this out together." His eyes welled up, but he didn't cry. He simply nodded, the weight on his shoulders lightening a bit. I knew the hardest part was contacting Emily. Despite everything, I had to reach out for Josh's sake. When I called Emily, she didn't answer. The second time, her voice came through, cautious and weary. "Jake, Emily," I said, steadier than I expected. "I know Josh came to see me." There was a long pause, then a deep sigh. "I told him not to bother you." I shook my head. "Emily, I want to help. He's my son too, no matter what happened between us." Her voice cracked as she replied, "I didn't think you'd care." "I care," I said firmly. "I always have. Let me help." After another pause, she asked, "What do you want to do?" Over the following weeks, a new chapter began. I worked tirelessly to get them back on their feet. I paid overdue rent and utilities, and I helped Emily find a stable job through an old contact. Though her pride was bruised, she eventually accepted the help. Josh began spending weekends with me, and we rebuilt the bond that time and distance had strained but never broken. We talked about school, friends, and his future. He wanted to study engineering in college. I promised him I'd help him get there, no matter what. Emily and I kept our interactions civil. There was no rekindling of our past relationship, but there was forgiveness, a quiet understanding for Josh's sake. Years later, as I sat in the audience at Josh's college graduation, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride. My son, standing tall and confident, had overcome the chaos of our fractured family to become extraordinary. When he crossed the stage and shook hands with the dean, I cheered louder than anyone else. Afterwards, as we stood in the bustling crowd, Josh pulled me into a hug. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For being there," he replied simply. I looked at him, my chest tight with love and gratitude. "Always, Josh, always." Looking back, I realized life rarely goes as planned. It twists and turns, forcing you to reevaluate what truly matters. I thought I'd lost everything when I left that house all those years ago, but I had not. The love between a father and son is unshakable, no matter the obstacles. In the end, it wasn't about betrayal or heartbreak, it was about redemption. Even in the darkest moments, there's always a way to rebuild, to heal, to move forward. As I watched Josh step into his bright future, I knew I had finally found peace, not because I had forgotten the pain of the past, but because I had chosen to let it go. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.